You're listening to The Sports Stove with host Vince Stover.
Here's what's cooking on today's Sports Stove podcast. NFL Draft Talk with my friend, the Bottom Line Lexington podcast. That's what's cooking on today's Sports Stove. Welcome into today's Sports Stove podcast. Today we have a special treat. It is our very first ever guest on the show. Although Bob Costas and Tony Romo and Michael Irvin have been trying to get on the show, I've said not yet. I've got someone else I need to have on first. This is former writer for the Fantasy Football Index. He had over 10 years on Sports Talk in Atlanta, Georgia, and currently the mysterious host of the Bottom Line Lexington podcast. So today we'll call him just that, Bottom Line. Welcome into the podcast, Bottom Line.
Thank you, Vince Stover. It's good to see you again. It's good to be reunited. So I'm glad to finally make an appearance on your podcast and to be the first ever guest on your podcast. If you narcs are out there looking for me to talk about something personal in my life or my current situation, it ain't happening. So there's no use to listen to the rest of it because we're just going to talk sports. Back to you, Vince Stover.
All right, it is going to be on. I've been on the Bottom Line Lexington podcast many times, and I've always
Too many, if you ask me, but that's neither here or there.
Have always appreciated the invite and glad to have you on with us today. Today we're talking about the NFL Draft, the only thing that's going on in the sports world these days.
Thank God for the NFL Draft.
I don't understand why we can't have golf. Why can't we have some guys out on the golf course? They can keep their 6-foot distance. We should at least be able to have that. But instead, we're watching marble racing and WWE. Did you watch that last night, by the way?
I did not.
Me neither. All right. So back to it. NFL Draft.
If it wasn't Macho Man versus Hulk Hogan, I'm not watching wrestling anymore.
I think that was on Wednesday night.
Rest in peace, Macho Man. God bless you, my friend.
All right, so we're going to talk NFL Draft today, and I want to get your thoughts on a few things that I've already covered on a solo pod, but now good to have some different opinions in. So let's start off with the hot topic in the NFL Draft, and that is the quarterback situation. There's really, it seems like 4 top quarterbacks and then everybody else behind them. So let's start off with this question first. How many quarterbacks do you think are going in the first round this year?
Well, our friends out in the desert say 4.5 is the number that will be going in the first round, but a lot of juice to the under, minus 180 to the under, so I'm going to follow the money on this one. I think you're looking at 4 quarterbacks in the first round. Now, where those quarterbacks are taken, especially Herbert and Love, those are the things you have to look at, Vince.
Good. So the question here is, and I didn't mention this in the introduction, but Bottom Line is my degenerate gambling friend. And so
now, why do you have to put degenerate in front of gambling? That's just a cheap shot, Vince.
So everything that comes from the bottom line is the bottom line. It's all statistical. It's all numbers. And so that's why it is called the Bottom Line Lexington podcast. So I want to make sure I add that in there. 4.5, that almost sounds like Trubisky's back in the draft with half a quarterback. But nonetheless, let's talk about these quarterbacks then. Burrow or Tua, number 1?
Burrow, obviously, the best season in the history of college football. You could argue that. Right now, the desert says minus 3,500, but he is a huge favorite. In other words, it's 35-1 that he will not be picked number 1. But my thing is this, and I mentioned this in a little column I wrote. Back in 1999, the worst draft pick in the history of the Cincinnati Bengals, and we'll get over draft histories later on in the show, Achilles Smith. Back in that year, Ricky Williams was the big running back in town. Mike Ditka, then coach of the Saints, if you can remember, he was actually coach of the Saints. He offered 9 picks to the Bengals that year for that number 3 spot where the Bengals eventually took Achilles Smith, and the Bengals said, nah, we're good. Ditka then gave those 9 picks to the Redskins, and Washington used those 9 picks to draft a bunch of bums, apparently, because they didn't make anything out of it. But if a team is going to offer maybe 3 1s for Joe Burrow, yeah, I think I would take it. Joe Burrow had a great season. He also had a great surrounding cast. Yep. So if a team is willing to trade up and give you, magic beans for Joe Burrow, I think I would take it.
So the question right now is Miami has got the big talk about possibly trading up in the draft. Most are saying they actually want Tua over Burrow, so even if they moved up to number 1, they would still take Tua. The question is, well, let's come back to that in just a moment. But with the quarterbacks, Burrow, the greatest season in college football history. Tua's stats, though, are not far behind. Actually has a better overall quarterback rating than Burrow in his college career. But, of course, Burrow was a one-year wonder, was okay in the previous season, but this year was great. Definitely wasn't great in 2018. Tua, his problem is injury, but his numbers are pretty good in the couple seasons that he got to play with Alabama.
Back to Burrow.
Yep.
If you're Urban Meyer and you took Dwayne Haskins and told Joe Burrow, hey, we're okay, quarterback. You want to leave town, go ahead and leave town. I've got these guys. We're going to go with these guys. If you're Joe Burrow, you win that Heisman Trophy, you don't mention Urban Meyer, at that Heisman Trophy ceremony. Thank you, Urban Meyer, for letting me leave so that I could actually win the Heisman and stick it up your you-know-what. Edit that out if you want to, Vince Stover. But these quarterbacks, the team that I think holds all the cards right here is Detroit.
Yep.
Do you want to stick with Stafford, who you've had for 11 years now? Do you want to stick with that and knowing what you get, the mediocrity you get, knowing the overpaying that you're doing for Mr. Stafford? Or do you want to go out and maybe get a Tua and get a guy who might electrify the franchise, a guy that might pump some blood in that franchise that you haven't had since the day Calvin Johnson retired? That's where Detroit is, where this entire draft hinges upon, especially if you're looking at Tua and the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I agree. I think Detroit, I forget who it was now, but a player came out, I think yesterday, and on Twitter on a video said, or maybe on Instagram on a video, told Patricia, if you want to keep your job next year, pass on Tua. And so the idea is let's win this year and focus on that as opposed to focusing on the future, which obviously a veteran player cares more about than anything else. But Patricia does have to think about his job, and the drafting authority in Detroit have to think about their jobs as well, and how will it work out. I think right now there's so much sentimentality, which I know you hate, but with Matt Stafford and everything his wife has gone through, and Detroit has kind of rallied around them, Stafford's not the problem in Detroit right now anyhow. I don't think that they're going to go quarterback here, at least not with their first pick. And I think that you're going to see, but that seems the most likely spot for the first trade to come in is that number 3 spot. Although I've heard that just through other professional podcasts that Detroit's asking price right now for that number 3 is basically the same asking price that Cincinnati would have. And so the question is, well, should we just go up to number 1 and go ahead and get who we want at number 1 if we're going to pay that price anyhow? Why take the risk and go to number 3?
Without Stafford last year, they went 3-12-1.
Right.
So they've got to do something.
Yeah.
So, and who remembers the quarterbacks that they had back there? I think they had Eric Kramer and Eric Hipple were the backup quarterbacks last year.
Rodney Peete may have made an appearance.
Andre Ware, Terry Danielson, Greg Landry. I'm going way too far back, ladies and gentlemen. That's neither here nor there. But if you go 3-12-1 and your quarterback missed most of the year, and now your coach, who is another one of Belichick's disciples who looks like he's going to be failing, yeah, do you have the luxury of trading all these picks maybe for picks down the line when you don't know if you'll be there down the line? So that's why you see a lot of these first-year GMs, a lot of these first-year coaches, they'll go out and they'll take their franchise quarterback first year because the pressure's not on them yet. The pressure is on a guy like Patricia in his third year now. There's no way they're going to get away from Stafford when the numbers say they probably should.
Right, and I think Patricia, too, knows, he should have been fired this year. And everybody's calling for it, and he still kept his job. And so I think the Lions are going to pass on quarterback and take advantage. They're hoping at least for trades to come. The next 2 quarterbacks that are being talked about the most are Jordan Love from Utah State and Justin Herbert from Oregon. 2 different styles of play. Herbert's been being talked about since before last college football season. Everybody talked about him as maybe being the best quarterback out there. By the end of the season, now he's either number 3 or number 4 on people's lists. And then Love has made this jump up the draft. I have my thoughts on those guys, but let me go ahead and start with your thoughts on Love and Herbert.
Bill Parcells. You ever heard of him, Stover?
I have.
Coach, Hall of Fame. Yeah, coached the Giants back in the day. Yeah, big tuna. He has these things called the quarterback commandments.
Okay.
And they're kind of prerequisites for things that you want in a quarterback when you're drafting them out of college. One of the things that is listed on these commandments is that a quarterback must come from a Power 5 school. Okay, that rules out Jordan Love.
Yep.
Must be a 3-year starter in college. Well, that counts Herbert. That also counts out Tua. Also counts out Joe Burrow.
Yep.
Must be a senior and graduate from college. must start 30 games and win 23 games. Those are and must complete 60% of their passes. This is Bill Parcells. And of these first 4 quarterbacks that are going in this first round, who can come up with those numbers? Herbert could come up with those numbers. So if you're looking at maybe a guy who's rising up draft boards, it's Herbert. Now, does Justin Love deserve this? I don't know. He played at Utah State. The one time he got a chance this year was against Wake Forest. They lost that game. Is Jordan Love, if he's so good, don't you think he would have dominated at Utah State out in the Big Sky Conference? Or whatever the conference they're in? Yeah, so if you ask me, Joe Burrow, I would take all offers for Joe Burrow. I definitely would take all offers for Tua. I wouldn't stretch and go for Jordan Love. Herbert is the only guy. Now, knowing all these things, all these quarterbacks are always overvalued in these drafts. Yeah. They always get picked too early, unless you're Lamar Jackson. So it's a question of, do you need a quarterback, and are you willing to pay for Justin Herbert? I think a lot of teams are, because Justin Herbert was able to do a lot of things in college that these other quarterbacks that are being first-round selection projections were not able to do.
So you would take Herbert over Love then?
Herbert over Love, and our friends out in the desert agree with me. Herbert a big minus 340 favorite over the plus 240 Love in terms of who's going first in the draft. Now, do I expect Jordan Love to go way earlier than he should? Yeah, because quarterbacks do. But still, Herbert is the better pick right here, and the Vegas people agree with me.
Yeah, mock drafts are a big joke, but I've seen Love now starting to look down into the 20s in mock drafts. I think a lot of this is people wanting him to end up somewhere. So I've seen him in New England late in the first round, and I think that's just a thought of people saying, oh, it'd be really cool if this quarterback dropped to the Patriots. I know that Green Bay has actually looked at and talked with him as well, so maybe there is some thought he's going to fall to that point. I don't see it happening. I think he's going at the very least before 20. I personally don't trust it. I don't think that Jordan Love's a guy, not for first round, that I would draft if I could. I'm not a big fan of Herbert either. To me, he wasn't enough of a winner in college, and I didn't see him being able to come through in big-time situations. Now, you can argue that, of course, Peyton Manning never beat Florida, but he did win a whole lot of other games as well. And so I think that, for me, I like Herbert more than Love, but if I was a team, I'd pass on both of them, especially in the first round. They'd be great second-round values, but in the first round, it's just not somebody that I would feel comfortable enough going with as my future quarterback.
Mel Kiper, in his latest mock draft, has Jordan Love going to New England at number 23.
Yeah.
Do you honestly see Belichick picking a quarterback at 23?
I would say probably not. He seems like the kind of guy that wants to show how smart he is. So he's going to take a guy in the second or third round, and there he's going to be the guy. But, I mean, you look at Stidham. Is Stidham the guy in New England? Everyone's saying there's no way Stidham can be the guy in New England.
Matt Castle was the guy in New England for a year, and you parlayed that into like $40 million. So Belichick, let me tell you, and I was saving this for New England, but I can't save it anymore. If I had to put my hard-earned money on one coach right now to be coach of the year, it would be Bill Belichick, because he's got one thing and one thing only on his mind this year, and that's to prove to everyone that it wasn't Tom Brady that got him those 6 Super Bowls. It was his genius. So you don't think he's going to coach people up? You don't think this is the 1 year of all his entire career where he is more fired up than ever? And we don't like to use the fired up term, but when it comes to Belichick, he is out to prove something this year. I would never bet against him. Whatever you can get for him being coach of the year, I would take it and run with it, because I can tell you right now, they will win the AFC East hands down. No matter who the quarterback is.
I picked this past year, I picked New England to win their division, and as the Super Bowl team, I was scared. I picked Kansas City, but I was scared to make against New England because of Brady and Belichick. I think Belichick's going to fall on his face this year.
No. Betting against Belichick will put you in the poorhouse quick. I'm here to tell you.
That's where I think it's going to be a massive, unless he brings in an experienced quarterback, which there's none. I mean, maybe if Cam Newton can come back from injury and they sign him and he's healthy, then okay, maybe I'm back on board. But at this point, going in with Stidham or Hoyer or some rookie quarterback, to me, I think it's a system issue, and I think Tom Brady fit the system perfectly. I don't think there's a quarterback out there right now that fits that system perfectly.
As of this morning, our friends in the desert say that Stidham is minus 200 to be the quarterback for opening day for New England. So the experts out in the desert say Stidham's the guy. So you like to follow the money. They know a lot more than we do. Yeah. So it looks like it's going to be Stidham, barring a Andy Dalton type trade, which I do not see happening whatsoever.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Let me go back to that idea, though, about systems. Everyone's a system quarterback. I think that's true to some degree or another. There are some quarterbacks that can maybe play multiple systems, but at the end of the day, systems everything. Why did Joe Burrow have a great senior year or last year at LSU? It's because of the system he was in. They brought in a new offensive coordinator, and it fit perfectly to what Burrow did. So looking at these top 4 quarterbacks, Burrow, Tua, Herbert, and Love, a lot of their success is going to be dependent on the system they play in. I always go back to Chicago with this here recently because Trubisky, it's not that he doesn't have any talent, it's that they haven't put the system in place in the year 2 for him that worked for him. And because of that, now it's going to be Foles that's going to take over in Chicago. We'll talk about them in a little bit. But, I mean, Burrow going to Cincinnati, a lot of the success lies on what system they run in Cincinnati. Tua going anywhere, same thing.
If you're the Bengals,
yep,
you have the number 1 pick, and you say, okay, we're going to take Joe Burrow, how come you don't open up the Brinks truck and bring in Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator from LSU? How come you don't go down there and get him, come on up here and call our plays?
Yep.
The Bengals don't operate like that. But in a perfect world, you say, hey, we're going to draft Burrow, we're going to bring his offensive coordinator, and all of a sudden now you've got something, a semblance apparently, of what you had at LSU. At least you have some familiarity. Why they didn't do that was beyond me. But then again, it's the Bengals, and we should expect the unexpected from the Bengals.
Yeah, and I think, too, they bring in Taylor as their coach last year. He's supposed to be this young offensive guru because he came from McVay, and it's an ego issue. You don't want to say that you're wrong after 1 year. A lot of people thought Taylor would get fired last year, and he didn't, and so they're putting their faith and confidence in him. It'll be interesting to see what happens. We'll get to Cincinnati in a moment as well. Let's talk about 3 other quarterbacks. 2 I like, 1 I hate, and but see your thoughts on these. Jake Fromm from Georgia, Jalen Hurts from Oklahoma/Alabama, and then Jacob Eason from out west in Washington. You have any thoughts on those 3 guys?
Our friends out in the desert say that Hurts should be a 3rd-round pick. It's when they think he'll go. But are you really putting the state of your franchise, the future of your franchise, on Hurts, especially Jacob Fromm at Georgia, who probably needed to stay another year? But then again, Jacob Fromm ran off 2 quarterbacks. One of them's going to get drafted, Jacob Eason from Washington. Mm-hmm. Another one is probably going to win the Heisman next year at Ohio State. So is Fromm really that good? The numbers say no, especially last year, and you'd think that he would improve over time. But if you look at his numbers, he's actually declined since his freshman, sophomore year going into his junior year. So am I excited about any of those quarterbacks? Not at all, and that's why they're not even being looked at in the 1st or 2nd rounds.
All right, so here's my thoughts on these guys. Eason's the one I don't like. I don't think he's 59% completion percentage in college. He did get run off by Jake Fromm, 39 touchdowns, 16 picks, and 132 quarterback rating. I'm not excited about that. Everybody's like, oh, he's got the talent and he's got the size and at 6'6", 227, but Eason's off my board. I'm not taking him. Fromm and Hurts are 2 other things. I compare both of them to Deshaun Watson. They both are winners in college, and they won consistently in college. Fromm, 6'2", 220. The argument about him is he does not have the strength in his arm to make the big throws. But he had a lot of success in Georgia, going 46-7 over his career, 78 touchdowns, 18 interceptions, and I really like what he did in college from a winning standpoint. I don't see him coming in year 1 and making an impact, but I see him as a guy, if he comes into an older quarterback situation like Indianapolis or maybe even Tampa, could be potential for him down the road. Jalen Hurts, I'm growing and growing and growing in my love for Jalen Hurts right now. Looking and watching, listening to him. He was on an interview with Rich Eisen this past week, and when you want, what I want out of a quarterback is a leader, and someone who can control a room well. Baker Mayfield, a little too immature for me. Jalen Hurts comes in. He's got a 49-4 record as a starter in college football. Now, we know he lost out his job to Tua. We know that Saban picked Tua over Jalen Hurts. Well, we understand all of that. 80 touchdowns, 20 interceptions, throwing the ball. That is not counting his rushing touchdowns, which are a lot of those as well. 65% completion percentage over his career as a starter as well. To me, Jalen Hurts, and I would not take him in the first round, but again, late second round, I think third round's a great value for Hurts. If you're able to bring him in to sit for a year or two, but again, it's going to come down to system for him too. He's going to have to be in the right system, but everything in the NFL is leading to the system that worked for Jalen Hurts, and so I think there's a better chance. I trust Hurts and Fromm more than I trust Herbert and Love, although I would not take them in the first round.
Let me give you a little history lesson here.
All right.
Vince Stover. The year is 1983. A Hall of Famer named Dan Marino is sitting in his living room just waiting for his name to be called. And he won't hear his name called for a long time in that draft. That the 7th overall pick was a guy named Todd Blackledge from Penn State. Now, when you listen to that, and I've watched, there's a 30 for 30 on that draft,
Yep.
What do they all say about Todd Blackledge? Oh, he's a winner. He just came off a championship year at Penn State. Well, being a winner in college is great, but it's not the end-all, be-all.
True.
Because Dan Marino won a few games at Pitt, not as many as Penn State did, but he still was a much better quarterback. So winning is nice, but it's not the end-all, be-all. And if you talk about interviews, Jalen Hurts was on an interview and said this and said that. Did you see Kyler Murray on Dan Patrick last year before the draft?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He couldn't get 2 words. Dan Patrick said it's still, to this day, one of the worst interviews he's ever done.
Definitely.
Because Kyler Murray couldn't say a word without looking off stage and looking at his father, who apparently was shaking his fist at him the whole time. So, yeah, being able to interview right now, not exactly my big thing.
Sure.
So, yeah, all these things about winning and being able to be a good interview, that's great to talk about. But can you put wins on the board and can you complete passes in the NFL? That's what none of us know until we see it.
Yeah, and I was trying to figure out what is that end-all, be-all. Was there one number that stood out that made a surefire pick at quarterback? Because I look back at guys in the past, guys that are playing currently in the NFL, and looking at their numbers in college and different things, and completion percentage, quarterback rating, all that kind of stuff, touchdown to interception ratio, nothing was consistent as far as if you can have this completion percentage, then you're going to be great in the pros. If you can have this, whatever, there is no one thing that you can look at and go, this is guaranteed to work in the NFL. I think it all, again, comes back to system. Kyler Murray is a perfect example of that. Arizona went all in on Kyler Murray, brought in the system that's going to fit him. He's successful in his rookie season, and we anticipate him getting better in the seasons to come as well. Quarterbacks are the funnest thing to talk about in the draft, but there's nothing that you can know for certain about a quarterback.
You made a great point about Arizona and Murray. Why didn't the Bengals do that with Burrow and
Right.
Brady? That's another story altogether. But you still got some free agents out there. Cam Newton, where is he going to end up? And Andy Dalton, is he going to sit there behind Joe Burrow all year, or is he going to mentor him? Yeah, that's the biggest. You think Brett Favre ever mentored Aaron Rodgers? No, he did not.
No.
He didn't want to do that at all. Where's Jameis Winston? He is the 30-30 man himself.
Yep.
Where is he going to end up? These are all still questions. Jacksonville's sitting out there. They need a quarterback. What are the Bengals going to do? Miami, are they going to take Tua or maybe go after Cam Newton or one of these free agents? This quarterback carousel has still not ended yet, and where these 3 guys, especially Cam, Dalton, and Winston, where they end is going to determine a lot about this draft and who picks these quarterbacks later in the draft.
Definitely. And I want to come back to that thought in just a few minutes when we come back down talking about draft needs in the teams and things like that, because I think there's some perfect fits for Jameis Winston, and I think some really good fits for Cam Newton as well. All right, let's go into running backs for a minute. Let's look at a few of these. Quarterbacks, we talked about looking at more than likely 4 quarterbacks taken in the first round. Then the argument comes to running backs. Is it ever worth taking a running back in the first round? Because it seems like you can find talented running backs all throughout the draft, yet there's some guys here this year's draft that are really, really good. To me, there's 4 top running backs. You can include a 5th as well. But let's talk about running backs in the first round. Should you take them or shouldn't you?
Our friends out in the desert say half. there will be a half running back taken. Now, half running back taken in the first round. Now, the over has a lot of the juice, so all the experts have taken the over in this one, but still, 0.5 running backs. When we first started watching football, Vince Stover, it was all about the running backs, the Eric Dickersons of the world, the people like that. Everybody wanted those stud running backs. Now, you can't even give them away hardly in the first round. DeAndre Swift is the guy who the people out in the desert say is going to be the first running back taken. I know you're a big fan of Jonathan Taylor at Wisconsin. Hey, do you really want to take a running back? I'm like you. If you don't get one of the best ones like Swift, why bother and why waste a first-round pick when you can get somebody else? And anybody these days, apparently, can run the football for 1,000 yards in the NFL.
Yeah, I think you have to look at, too, right now everybody's saying you get a running back for maybe his first 2 contracts, maybe 6 years total, and then you let go of them after that. You're seeing Todd Gurley being a good example of that right now. But you got guys like Saquon Barkley who are obviously impactful and change the game. Ezekiel Elliott's that way. Dalvin Cook is similar as well in that way. To me, it is if you can get the best running back, then why not take him? But you're also looking at right now, there's not a lot of teams in the NFL that desperately need running backs. There's really very few of them. I've got 7 teams that could use running backs, new running backs, but at the same time, of those 7 teams, most of them already have a solid number 1 running back. So you're looking for a change of pace or a guy that's going to take over when you don't want to re-sign your current running back to a big contract. In the first round, I think there's only about 2 teams that makes sense to take running back in the first round. I think there's only 2 running backs worth taking in the first round with DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor. I'm a huge Jonathan Taylor fan. I'd take him over DeAndre Swift. His numbers in college back up that he's a better running back, but that also shows you that he may have more wear and tear already in college.
He's not another Ron Dane? Is that what you're saying?
It depends on what team he goes to. He might be.
If Jerry Rice had been drafted by the Bengals, we would not know who Jerry Rice is today. Yes.
Yeah, so Jonathan Taylor had last season alone had over 2,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, and then he surprised me and surprised a lot of people at the Combine running a 4.39. Now, obviously, Combine numbers are just whatever, but when you're showing that athleticism there and that quickness that can be there, I like Jonathan Taylor. He has fumble issues. I'm a Packer fan. They don't desperately need a running back, so I wouldn't take him in the first round because of that for that team. But there are other teams out there. I think the Jets are a team to watch for, but they're not going to go running back in the first round. Titans as well. They lost their backup running back. They just re-signed Henry, so they're probably not looking the first round. Tampa needs a running back desperately, and then I think Kansas City's another team to watch for first-round running backs wise. They've got good running backs, but not great running backs, and if they can land one of these 2, then that's just going to help them. They have no space in the cap to sign free agents. They need to hit on these draft picks. They only have 5, I think, this year, the least amount in the draft. And I think Kansas City and Tampa are the 2 to watch in the first round for running backs.
If I said that a running back in 2 seasons had 2,048 yards and 17 touchdowns, and both of those years he had over 1,000 yards rushing, would you say that would be a good player?
You would assume so, yeah.
You would assume so. That man's name is Philip Lindsay, who is a running back of Denver, who was an undrafted player 2 years ago. Now he's a Pro Bowler with 2 straight 1,000-yard seasons. That just goes to show you, running backs, especially in today's day and age, do you really need to spend a high draft pick if they're not head and shoulders above the rest? Probably not. It's
also a great picture that you need 2 of them because Lindsley's always had a second guy with him. This year, probably the best one he's ever had, Melvin Gordon getting signed from the Chargers, Los Angeles Chargers, and even though he has produced, yet still they see the need to bring in another great or very good running back in Melvin Gordon. And so that's why these teams that you might not look at and go, oh yeah, they need a running back because they've got somebody. That doesn't mean that they're not going to bring in a second guy. People like Indianapolis, Detroit, Seattle, they've got good running backs, but they can add another really good running back and be even better in that area of the team as well. There's three other running backs that are being discussed as the top running backs. LSU's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Utah's Zach Moss. I haven't seen any games of Utah. I have no idea how good he is other than what his stats say. And then Ohio State's J.K. Dobbins, who has very similar numbers to Jonathan Taylor, 2,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, ran a 4.5 in the combine this year. So for me, Dobbins stands out more than Moss because I've heard of him. I've seen him play. Zach Moss at Utah, only 1,400 yards last season, 15 touchdowns. And I've seen him going anywhere from late first round to the third round. So running backs is, I think, a bigger question mark than quarterbacks because quarterbacks get valued high. You kind of know where they're going to go. Running backs, even really good college running backs, could slide into day 2 or possibly day 3 of the draft. Guys that are better than maybe the quarterbacks that are getting drafted. It's just how they're valued in the NFL right now is not as high, so they're going to go later in the draft. I'm going to say 2 running backs in the first round. That's my guess. I think Swift and Taylor both go. So I take the over on that half a running back that Vegas has.
Well, it's there's a lot of money on the over. I'll take over, but I'll say 1. I'll say it's only going to be Swift. I don't think Jonathan Taylor makes the first round. That'll be a bucket of pride that you and I can put on that one if it's over.
All right, very good. Georgia running backs have a good history.
Yes, they do.
Especially recently and throughout history. And so I think it's a safe bet to go there with Swift, and I assume the professionals know more than me, so we'll say Swift probably goes 1. Personally, I like Taylor better. All right, let's shift over to wide receivers. There's a lot of talk about a lot of receivers going in the first round. There is definitely a strength of the draft right now in wide receivers. And, sitting there's a couple of seniors, most of them juniors, 3-year players in college, and coming out. Who do you like in the wide receivers, or maybe who's your top 5?
Judy and Lamb are easily 1-2 in my book. Our friends out in the desert saying it's going to be 5.5 receivers taken in the first round. A little bit of juice to the over that one. So a lot of people are thinking 6 or more in terms of where the public money's going right now. But yeah, it's Judy and Lamb for me, and then the rest are a little bit kind of a second tier below that. But yeah, it's those 2 guys for me, and it's just depending on where those guys fall. You don't see these guys in these mocks. You don't see these guys going in the 1, 2, or 3. But you said, I'm looking at Mel Kiper's draft right now, and he's got Judy going to the 49ers at 13, and after that, you just see kind of the avalanche of receivers coming in.
Yeah, I think most people are looking at number 11. The Jets seem to be a very likely place for a receiver to go, and anything after that, it's all going to fall into place from there. The question is which receivers. I have 4 receivers in the top tier, so to say, with Judy, Lamb. Then I have LSU's Jefferson and Clemson's Higgins in there in the top 4. The one guy that's getting the most buzz, it seems like right now, is Henry Ruggs III out of Alabama because he's just a speedster like crazy. I'm just looking at the numbers, and I got to admit, he seems vastly overrated to me to be the number 3 receiver taken in the first round.
Well, there's 2 things. Like you said, the 4.27 at the combine, and it says Alabama after his name. Right. So that helps him in a lot of ways. It's a wonder the Raiders don't trade up to get him because, he's the next Darius Hayward-Bay. But because we all know that all you got to do is have speed and the Raiders will take you. But yeah, he's a guy he's one of those feast or famine kind of guys. He's either going to hit it big or he's going to be a huge bust. That's why he's not on the top of my receiver list in terms of guys I would pick.
Yeah, I'm looking at he's not super big. He's not tiny, but he's 5'11", 188. Last season, he had 40 catches, which is less than any other of the top 10 receivers in the draft. He has 7 touchdowns last season as well. And I'm just looking at these numbers, and I'm thinking, he was better, it seems like, in 18 than he was in 19 to a degree. He had 11 touchdowns in 2018. But still, it's just sitting here looking at this going, he doesn't seem like the guy that's just so obvious. Everybody's saying he's obviously going to be this great guy. I've heard his name with the Jets as a better fit with the Jets than Judy or Lamb. To me, it's a guy that has all the buzz right now, but maybe not the stats to back up the buzz. I'm sure he's a good player. He played at Alabama. And if you're at Alabama, you're not a bad player. But is he one of the top 3 receivers? I don't think so. I have him 5 or even 6 on my list. just looking at numbers, and again, I go back to guys, I've seen Justin Jefferson play more than some of these other guys. He looks really, really good on the field. He's got good size at 6'1", 202. He's got good speed at 4.43. Last season, he had 111 catches, and so he's produced in college as well. I like him. T. Higgins and Clemson. I'm a big. I like Clemson. I don't cheer for Clemson. They're not my favorite team, but I like Clemson a lot. T. Higgins has got the size at 6'4". He's got good speed at 4.54, and then 13 touchdowns last year. He produced 2 straight years in a row playing solid football for a top-tier college football team. So I'm a fan. I got Judy and Lamb up there at the top as well. I think Judy is number 1 in my book, although I've seen CeeDee Lamb number 1 in many people as well. Todd McShay says that Judy is the best route runner he's ever viewed, and you don't know how much of that's for clicks and whatever from there, but I'm in on Jerry Jeudy. I'm in on CeeDee Lamb as well, and CeeDee Lamb's got good size. His name sounds like a small person, CeeDee Lamb. He's got good size as well, so I think those two are number 1. After that, it's a little bit more of a guessing game. You've got the kid from Arizona State, I believe, Ayuk, and then you've got Pittman from USC. Mims from Baylor's getting a lot of talk right now, too. Of course, he's got great size as well as Pittman. So there's a lot of guys out there. I'm looking at, I think 5 will go in the first round, but I see probably about 10 guys that seem to be in a good first through second round talent.
So you're going to take under my 5.5?
Yeah.
Receivers. So there's another bucket of pride right there, Vince Stover. I'll take the over on receivers. I think they're going to, especially mid and late this round, those receivers are going to fly off the board.
Wide receivers is a fun topic this year, especially with the amount of talent that's there. I'm a Green Bay Packer fan, and they desperately need a solid number 2 wide receiver. So I'm hoping for one of these guys, especially Jefferson or T. Higgins, to fall to them there in the late first round. But will they take them? Probably not. They'll probably go with an offensive lineman, and it won't matter anyways. All right, first round. When do you think the first trade will be in the first round?
I'm thinking it's Detroit. That's just me. I think we're going 1-2 are going to pretty much go as is, with Chase Young, the linebacker defensive end, going to Washington. And then Detroit's going to pull something, because when you're desperate, sometimes you make decisions you might not normally make. And Detroit right now, their general manager and their coach, they're both seemingly on borrowed time. And if they don't produce this year, that time may have run out. So, yes, I see a draft trade of some sort with Detroit in the first round. But I'm in the minority of thinking that. Why would you, if you're Detroit, do you want to just pick some, cornerback or somebody that's going to help you this year? Or do you want to trade down and say, hey, even if we do stink, look at all these draft picks we traded for next year. We can use that to kind of stick around.
Well, and the talk right now is you're talking about teams like the Chargers or the Dolphins trading up to get a quarterback at 3, which means that they're not going to be moving down too far. And you're talking about Okudah, the cornerback from Ohio State, and Simmons, the linebacker from Clemson, are really the next 2 guys after Young and Burrow that aren't quarterbacks. And so Detroit can move down just a couple spots and still get one of the top 3 players in the draft, possibly, if they don't move too far down.
Who would you rather start the season with? Matthew Stafford is your quarterback, and he's been there 12 years. We know what to expect. Or Tua, a guy like Tua, or one of these Herbert-type quarterbacks where you could say, hey, we're going to pin our future on this guy because we've had 12 years with Matthew Stafford, and it hasn't been very good.
Yeah, I still think Detroit needs to stick with Stafford longer. I said in a podcast a month or so ago now, I thought Stafford would have been perfect in Indianapolis, and they could have traded him down there for that, get Brissett up in Detroit with Patricia, who he knows and has worked with, and then draft a quarterback there in Detroit at number 3. That's obviously not going to happen with Phillip Rivers going to Indianapolis earlier in free agency. But I think you're talking about if you can go into this year with Matthew Stafford at quarterback and then add someone like Okudah at cornerback since you got rid of Darius Slay, it seems like for Detroit that makes the most sense for this year. But again, the question is how I don't think Patricia's going to be planning too far for the future, more so for the now. So that's what I think they'll go with. I think it's the perfect trade spot. They're in a perfect position with Miami, with all the first-round picks they have. It's a perfect year to be sitting at number 3 when you know pretty much who the first 2 picks are going to be.
Right. I love chaos and anarchy, but you said it yourself. It is Stafford. With him last year, they were 3-4-1. Without him, they were 0-8.
Yeah.
That's basically all you need to know.
That's it. I think there's a little bit of talk about Miami moving up to number 1. I just don't see that happening. There's some talk about the Redskins moving down as well. But to me, if you're in a position to pick the best player in the draft, which Washington's going to be in that position, you got to take that pick there. Chase Young will be a great addition to Washington's defense. And I think with Ron Rivera being there, I think that's the kind of football they're going to play is defense and run the ball.
Washington. Very interesting situation. Drafting number 2. If you don't believe in Haskins, do you go out and get Tua? Do you go out and get a quarterback right here? And let's just be honest, Ron Rivera, Riverboat Ron, who did he bring in to be his quarterback this year? Not Cam Newton.
Right, Kyle Allen.
But Kyle Allen,
Yeah.
who he was a coach of last year at Carolina, who wasn't bad, but he wasn't great.
Right.
So what does that say, A, about Cam Newton, B, about what he thinks about Kyle Allen, C, what does he think about Dwayne Haskins, who the first game he won last year, and basically the only game he won, he was off celebrating while somebody else had to go in and run the clock out.
Yeah, I think Washington's an interesting team. They have been for a long time just because of how crazy they are. And I think you got Rivera who comes in and he's seen Haskins, but it's not like he knows him well. But you've got also Snyder, who is the wild card in any situation in Washington. And from everything that everybody's saying is he loves Dwayne Haskins. He's the quarterback that Snyder wants on this team. And so for that reason, if it wasn't Snyder, then there'd be a chance I think they'd take someone like Tua at 2. But I think they're sticking with what they got. Kyle Allen comes in. It's a very nice piece for a backup quarterback that can maybe win you a few games if Haskins goes down hurt or is just really, really bad again this season. And then they can go next year and go out and get the top quarterback in the draft possibly next year, and Trevor Lawrence from Clemson. So it's kind of a win-win for Washington. You can get better now by getting a defensive player, and if your offense is really, really bad, well, hey, you get a good pick next year and maybe get the best quarterback in the draft.
We're living in a different world now than we have been in the past in terms of football with this coronavirus. If you're a guy like Trevor Lawrence, if you're one of these guys who are projected to be a first-round pick next year, do you even bother playing this coming season? Is it going to be a shortened season? Is it going to be a season moved up? Is it going to be moved back? Do you even bother whatsoever playing? If I'm a guy like Trevor Lawrence, I don't even know if I try this year to even play because the only thing it could do to my draft position is hurt it.
Well, I think it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to be the number 1 draft pick, then maybe you consider not playing. And again, a lot of that comes down to what happens with the season. You won't know that till we get closer to the fall. But if your goal is to be the best quarterback you can be and to make it long in the NFL, I think you do play. I think if your draft stock goes down, then what you're looking at is you're getting put on a better team in the draft next year. I think that, again, it just depends on what your goals are. Everybody wants to be number 1. No one wants to be number 2. But at the end of the day, I'm anti that kid should sit and not play. I'm anti that in basketball. I'm anti it in football. I think you signed up to play football for the school. You go play football for the school. You can get hurt in a car wreck. I know that's a silly argument, but there's so many different ways that you can end your career. And playing football to me is as safe as driving down the highway.
Did you fault Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey a couple years ago when they were first-round draft picks at running back and they set out their bowl games?
I did, yeah. I mean, I wanted them to play. Okay. Now, having said that, I understand what they're doing. Same thing with Bosa this last year at Ohio State. I understand why they're doing it, and it's their decision, not mine. I get all that. But to me, if you don't want to, you're there to play. And if you're not going to play, then what's the point of going? Tua could have sat out after coming in and played one game in the championship game. He could have sat out and not hurt his hip and all that kind of stuff. But I think, and especially these guys that are in the top schools in the nation, the Clemsons, the Alabamas, the LSUs, these guys are getting better by playing. And it's going to help their career long term to continue to learn and to grow and to improve in areas and take that risk than it would be otherwise. Tua has multiple injuries, and he's still going to be drafted in the top 3 more than likely, and he's still going to make his money, and he's still going to have an opportunity to play. And to me, I just don't like it when they sit out for fear of injury or whatever it may be. To me, it's it's a sign of where our society is today. We're getting weaker mentally, and I just personally I like to see them play. It's their decision. It's their family's decision. They make the decision that's best for them. So in that sense, I don't fault them. But looking at it from the outside, I want them to play. I don't think they should sit just because they're waiting to get drafted.
Right. You want them to play because you're a fan.
Right.
Because we're all fans of watching these sports, and we're all fans of trying to pick winners or whatever. But you want them. But in the bottom line, no pun intended, they've got to think about their future. If they're
Definitely.
playing in worthless bowl games, I don't care whatsoever for them. I think if you're a quarterback, it might be advantageous to play. Any other position, maybe not so much.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because one of the things people are looking for when they're drafting, especially at quarterback, is that leadership, that dependability, that maturity.
It's a totally different position, yes.
Yeah, and if a quarterback sits out a bowl game, then it's looked at as, oh, he really gave up on his team. He wasn't there for him. If a diva wide receiver sits out, most people are going to go, well, they're a wide receiver. That's how they act. And
the NFL is still a quarterback-driven league.
Yeah.
As much as you hate to say it, if you don't have a top-level, top 10 quarterback, you're not going to win. Ryan Tannehill could get you to the AFC Championship game, but I don't think he can get you to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's just you could get so far with a mediocre quarterback until it just your luck runs out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I want to see them play, but I don't fault them for making a decision they think's best for them. And but they do have to think about that. How will the NFL teams view them for doing this? Christian McCaffrey obviously worked out just fine. Bosa worked out just fine. So at the end of the day, it's
bottom line credo. It's all about who you are in life.
Yeah,
it makes a big difference.
Very good point. Thank you for listening to the Sports Stove podcast. This has been part 1 of our sit-down NFL talk with the host of the Bottom Line Lexington podcast. We will be dropping part 2 in just a few days, but hopefully until then, you'll enjoy what you've listened to so far. You can find us on Twitter at Sports Stove or on Facebook, the Sports Stove podcast. And until next time, we'll see you around the Sports Stove.